Hey guys, this is Rich from Phoenix Furniture Restorations, and I am already back with another video. I've been working on a couple of different pieces the past few weeks, so that means that if everything goes according to plan at least, I'm going to have a couple of videos coming out in the next week or so. But for this video, we're going to be looking at these two nightstands, these two Art Deco nightstands that I have here. They're both covered in a beautiful walnut veneer, but unfortunately the finish is completely failing, especially on the tops. And there's some hardware that's missing too on one of the drawers. And I pretty much scoured the internet to try to find a matching piece of hardware. But unfortunately I couldn't, so I'm just going to order some new Art Deco poles online, and I'm hoping that they go well with the set. There was a bunch of residue of something. I can't really figure out exactly what it was. But there was a bunch of residue left all over the tops and on one of the sides of the pieces. So I really can't wait to get in there and just start to remove all that and let that beautiful walnut shine. You can see that on the sides of the pieces, on the trim work, it's a lot darker. It's almost black. And I like that a lot. I'm definitely going to be keeping that look. It's a very Art Deco kind of a look, and I think it just suits the pieces very well. So without any further ado, let's get into refinishing these pieces and give them a nice glow up. So step number one, of course, is giving the pieces a very thorough cleaning. And in this case, I'm using some Dawn dish soap diluted in some water. And I usually like to use a degreaser. Degreasers work very well, but lately I've been using Dawn dish soap. And not that I'm against at all degreasers or anything, or using anything that's toxic or harsh. Sometimes I just like to show, different ways of doing the same thing. So if you don't like working with degreasers or things that are a little bit more on the harsh side, Dawn dish soap is an excellent alternative. It does really well in removing oils and grease, which is something you definitely want to get off the piece before you start working on it in any way. So all I'm doing is I'm just applying the dish soap, I'm giving it a really good scrub, and then I'm coming in with a damp paper towel and I'm just wiping up the residue. And I'm going to be cleaning pretty much every square inch of these pieces. I'm just removing the drawers here, and you can see this drawer is just absolutely disgusting. I wouldn't want to put anything in this drawer, but don't worry, we'll take care of that later. But anyway, as I was saying, I like to give the entire piece of extremely good cleaning. Even the bottoms, underneath the bottom and inside the carcass, which are places that you don't really necessarily see or notice when the piece is all together. But it's just something that I like to do. It makes me feel a lot better when I know that I've cleaned the entire piece head to toe. And as I was cleaning, I found the maker's mark, which is always a nice thing to find. Now that I've cleaned the entire piece, I'm just going to remove the hardware. And this hardware is really nice looking. I really like this hardware. I believe it's solid brass with a little tiny piece of bakelite at the very tip. Now I'm just going to begin scraping here, and I'm just doing a test scrape just to see how thick this finish is. And with the first pull of my carbide scraper, I kind of already knew that this finish was too much on the thick side. So I'm just going to continue scraping a little bit more, but it makes a lot more sense for me to use a chemical stripper on this piece rather than scraping, just because of how thick the finish was. I usually like to scrape. Scraping is my preferred method of removing a finish, but if I have to use a chemical stripper, that's probably the second best way. So I'm just going to clean this up a little bit with the vacuum, and before we start to strip, I'm just going to remove these weird areas over here where there was some kind of paper or something that was stuck to the tops. And this is something that a carbide scraper is actually fantastic for. If you have anything that's kind of stuck or anything that's layered on to the wood, if that makes sense, a carbide scraper is a great way to get it off. And I have to remove this before I use my chemical stripper because chemical stripper won't really work as effectively as it would have if you have anything in the way, like if there's any dirt or grime or, material that's stuck to the tops. You have to remove that first so the chemical stripper can really do its job and get in there and remove the finish. All right, so it's time to start applying the chemical stripper. And I'm using Clean Strip Premium Stripper, which is the stripper that I always use. It's absolutely a great stripper. It's methylene chloride free and it works extremely fast. I just put the stripper on right here. I'm just brushing it, and I really only have to wait about maybe 5 minutes at the most before the finish starts to lift. I've seen other strippers where you have to wait a couple of hours or even overnight. And to me, it's just kind of a waste of time, honestly. I just don't have that kind of time. So with the right product, you can pretty much get the same results in literally a couple of minutes. So I just brushed on the stripper. I let it sit for maybe 3 to 5 minutes. And now I'm just taking a putty knife and I'm just very gently scraping off the finish. And most of the finish was coming off. It was being a tiny bit stubborn. I would say I was probably getting a good 80% of the finish off with the first few swipes. So I'll just come in with a little bit of extra stripper and some steel wool, and I'll just get the remaining finish off. Now you can see how dark that finish is when in that little puddle that's right there. And you might be thinking to yourself, why is it so dark when a finish is usually supposed to be clear? And that is because most of the time, I don't know about most of the time, but a lot of the time, they use a tinted lacquer just to give the piece its color. So what you're seeing here isn't exactly the color of the finish, it's the color of the tinted lacquer that they use to give this piece its final color. Just scooping up all the goop into a paper towel, and I'm going to put that in an open container that I have outside and let it completely air dry before disposing of it in the normal garbage. Now you might notice that I'm not wearing normal nitrile gloves in these shots while I'm working with the stripper. I'm wearing something called butyl gloves. And these gloves are made specifically for working with stuff like chemical strippers, acetone, and things like that. Because regular nitrile gloves, they are helpful in certain situations, but when you're working with harsh chemicals like this, the chemicals actually eat right through the glove and it pretty much disintegrates. So if you're working with chemical strippers or acetone or, harsh chemicals, I would strongly recommend grabbing a pair of these butyl gloves. And they're not disposable, so you can continue to wear them over and over. So it's worth the money and protection. So I did my first round of stripper on both tops. And now I'm coming in with just a very light layer of stripper. And I'm just going to do a second round with a little bit of steel wool, and I'm just going to grab the remaining bits of finish off. Now for all of the trim work, I'm just jumping straight in with some steel wool, and I'm just going to try to get as much of that color out as I can. Now I can't really tell if they used a paint to color this trim work, or if they used a very dark tinted lacquer to color the trim work. I couldn't really tell. I was leaning more a little bit towards tinted lacquer just because it had a slight transparent look to it, which obviously you don't get with paint. But yeah, I don't know. I couldn't really tell with this one. Now, as I'm refinishing this piece, or at least stripping this piece, I'm thinking about what I want to do with this trim work. I'm definitely leaning towards recreating the dark look, but I'm also thinking about what this piece would look like with a very light trim. And I think either way, it would definitely come out looking fantastic, but I'm definitely leaning more towards going dark. And you can see I'm just using some acetone on a shop towel, and I'm just getting rid of any residue that might be left over from the stripper. I'm just going to tilt these pieces on their side, and I'm going to begin stripping the sides. Now you can see as I'm applying the stripper, I'm really globbing it on thick, and that's important when you're using chemical stripper. You really want to give it a really thick coat, and this will just give it the best chance of really removing that finish and letting it separate from the wood. So I just wanted to mention really quickly here, I know I told you guys that I recently created my own website, and while it's still under construction, I have been having a little bit of trouble with the contact me section of my website. Basically, there's a section of my website that you can write to me, and I'll get the message and I'll answer you. But for some reason, I haven't been getting the notifications that anybody's written to me, when in reality, there's been quite a few of you who have written to me. So I am so sorry for not getting back to you if you were one of the people who wrote to me on my website. But luckily, I did fix the issue, so I will be getting back to everybody. Having a website has been a pretty new experience for me. I haven't really had a website ever before, so it's a learning process. But yeah, no, if you were one of the people who wrote to me, I'm really sorry about not getting back to you. But I fixed the issue, so hopefully by now I did. So as I was pretty much finishing up stripping these pieces, I just noticed out of the corner of my eye that there was one little area of veneer that was on the top that was a little bit separated from the substrate. So I'm just using some CA glue here, and I'm just getting it down inside that crack, adding some activator just to speed up the dry time. And unfortunately, it didn't really work. So I'm guessing that the stripper ended up seeping down inside that crack when I was stripping, so it's kind of interfering with the bonding of the glue. So I'm just going to try one more time and just put a little bit more of CA glue in that crack, and luckily the activator that was still in there reacted with the glue, and this time it worked. Now to strip the drawers. I'm just going to put a nice big glob of stripper on each one of the drawers, let it sit for a couple of minutes, and I'm going to remove this old dull finish. So I just wanted to take a moment and just thank everybody for watching this video. I know that I've been a little bit MIA lately, and that's just because I've been just so busy with work and with a couple other things, including working on these projects. But things are starting to slow down a little bit over here, so hopefully I'll be able to get a video out more regularly than I have been. I'm thinking probably around every 2 weeks or so I'll have a new video, maybe even earlier if things really go right. And also, I'd like to get your feedback. I know you guys in the past have said that you like the longer videos, and when it comes to this video, I easily could have made it under a half hour long, but I know you guys said that you like the longer videos. So just let me know if that's still the case. You guys want me to make longer videos, or should I shorten them up a bit? Let me know in the comments. I love hearing from you guys. Now, this is just a little bit of a random step, but I'm just going to mark the inside of the drawers just so I know exactly which drawer goes where. Since these drawers are veneer, they really do belong in certain spots to continue the pattern. Now, I'm going to show these next few clips in real-time speed just to show you exactly how slow you should be sanding. And I know that it's a little bit slower than you're used to, because the footage is often very much sped up. But any faster than this with a power sander, you risk getting the those pigtail marks, and honestly just not a very good sanding. You really want to let the machine do all of the work for you. You don't want to rush it, and you don't want to kind of push it faster than it really wants to go. And the same goes for pressure. When you're holding the sander, you don't want to apply too much pressure downwards. Maybe just a tiny bit, but you really want to let the weight of the sander do all the work for you. I often see people who use the sander and they're going way too fast, and obviously putting too much pressure because the sander itself is working slower than normal. And this is especially obvious with a orbital sander because the rotation slows down. So if you're using an orbital sander and you notice that the rotation of the sandpaper itself is slowing down, you're pushing way too hard. We're going to be hand sanding the waterfall edge of these beautiful pieces because the waterfall edge tends to be delicate, and I don't want to use a power sander on it. I could use a foam pad by Surf Prep, but I like to err more on the side of caution when it comes to these waterfall edges because the veneer is usually extremely thin on that curve. Now, since this is my first round of sanding, I'm not trying to really get every little nick and scratch out. I'm just trying to give it a very superficial kind of sanding almost. I'm just trying to basically get whatever remaining finish, little bits of finish off, and just expose a little bit of new wood. And then I'll come in with my next round of sanding, and then I'll get all of the little scratches and little imperfections out. The danger of trying to get every little mark and scratch out on your first round of sanding is that you're going to dig too much into that veneer, which is extremely thin. And when you go to your next round of sanding, you're probably going to end up burning through. The whole goal really is to preserve as much of the veneer as possible. And that's also where the pencil trick comes in really handy. It really helps to preserve that veneer and to prevent you from going through. But I'll explain more about the pencil trick a little bit more in depth later on when I get to that point. So I already did my first round of sanding with 180 grit sandpaper on all the veneer, and now I'm going to come in with 150 grit, which is a little bit of a lower grit, and I'm going to begin sanding down all of the trim work. Now, I've explained this in previous videos, but just in case you haven't seen any of those videos, I'm sanding the trim work with a lower grit because the lower you sand, the darker a stain will appear. So with the veneer, I'm not putting any stain on the veneer. So the veneer I'm going to be sanding to 220, but all the trim work I'm going to be staining. And I want the trim work to look very dark and opaque. So sanding to 150 grit for the trim work is going to help me achieve that look. Now you're going to notice right here, there's a lot of imperfections in this wood. And that's okay because the stain that I'm going to be using is very opaque. So it'll cover that all up. Now there are these little pins on the inside the carcass on the sides, and these are just little spacers, I guess you can call them, to help the drawers go in and out smoothly. And since I need to sand the inside of the carcass, I'm just removing them for now, and I'll put them back a little bit later on. I'm just going to flip these pieces upside down so I can reach the underside. And I'm going to begin here by just removing these little furniture glides, these metal furniture glides, so I can clean them up a little bit and also access the entire base. Next, I'm just going to give it a really quick vacuum because there were a couple spider eggs and some weird gross stuff underneath there. And then I'm going to give it a really good cleaning with some Dawn dish soap. And this isn't something that I necessarily have to do. It's just something I really like to do. I'm just OCD that way, I guess. And I'm just going to give the base of the underside of the base a little bit of a sanding, a light sanding, just to get rid of some of that ugliness. Now I'm just going to spin you around here for a second and just show you while I have these upside down. I found a couple of areas underneath here where there were a few little gaps, and the gaps are in the substrate, so I want to fill those up. So I'm going to be using some Quickwood here, and Quickwood is a 2-part wood epoxy, and all you have to do is just break off the amount that you need. You knead it in between your fingers until it's one solid color, and then you just apply it. Now, I guess I could leave these alone, but I don't want to take the chance that down the road sometime it could get larger and therefore weaker, and it could very well end up cracking the veneer. So I'm just taking this Quickwood, which dries actually harder than wood itself. It dries extremely hard, and I'm just going to basically stuff these holes until I can't fit any more in there and let it dry. Now, there were a lot more of these holes and cracks along both pieces on the bottom, but I'm just going to show you just a couple shots of this right here. But it was pretty much just this same process along almost the entirety of the bottom on both pieces. Now, as that Quickwood is drying, I'm just going to start to tackle these drawers inside. And oh my goodness, were they dirty? It was like a bunch of candy, there was stains, and just a bunch of weird stuff that honestly I don't even know what half of it was. So I'm just taking my putty knife here, and I'm just trying to scrape up as much of this gunk and candy and stuff as I can. I'm going to come right back to the inside, but first I'm just going to take care of the rest of the drawer box. And these drawer boxes were a little bit on the rough side. They weren't that great. They weren't in terrible condition, but it definitely needed a nice good sanding. So I'm just using a 120 grit, I believe this is. And I'm just going to smooth out and clean up the drawer box. All right, so now getting back into cleaning the inside, and you can see just how nasty it is. And I'm just using some acetone here on a shop towel, and I'm just trying to scrub this drawer box out as best as I can. And I'm glad I did, because the acetone worked very well, and it got about 80% of all that stuff out. So to get the rest, I'm just going to give it a very good sanding, being very careful not to go through the veneer, because this is a veneer. It's a beautiful mahogany veneer, but it's pretty much the same thickness as the rest of the piece when it comes to the veneer. So I have to be very careful, while at the same time giving it a very good sanding. So it's a delicate balance. After vacuuming up all the dust, I'm just going to use a little bit more acetone, and I'm just going to show you how much better it looks now. And I did the same process for the rest of the 3 drawers. Alright, so my quick wood is finally ready and dry, so I'm going to give it a very good sanding and just kind of sand it down to shape and make sure it's flat. You know, I know you're not going to be able to see this when the piece is upright, but for me personally, it's those little things that kind of add up, so I like to be very, very thorough. And I'm also going to be sanding and staining the back. Again, this is something I totally don't have to do, but it's just one of those things where I just makes me just feel better. And I'm not going to sand down the back panel. I'm just sanding down the trim work around it. I want to leave all that writing and all of the markings that are on it. So I'm just going to give it a really good cleaning with some Dawn dish soap and leave it as is. And you can see the back was actually pretty dirty, so I'm glad I did it. Flipping these pieces back upright. And I'm going to start now to check for any loose veneer that I might have missed. And to do that, I'm just tapping on the veneer along the edges. Tapping it is a great way to see, by hearing the difference of tone in the wood, you could tell if any veneer is lifting or not. And I did show this in one of my previous videos with the sound on. And it's pretty subtle, the difference in sound, but you can hear it. If any veneer is loose or the glue had failed underneath it, it'll sound a little bit higher pitched in tone. So I did find one area that needed to be glued down. So I'm just taking some CA glue, very thin CA glue, so it kind of runs down in behind the veneer. And I'm just going to spray a little bit of activator just to speed up the dry time. And I should have held the veneer a little bit better as it dried, so it would have dried a little bit more flush to the substrate, but it's alright, it wasn't too bad. The only slight con about using this stuff is that it leaves quite a bit of residue behind afterwards. But that shouldn't be a problem in this case. I'm just going to give it a really good sanding, obviously being very careful not to go through the veneer, and you never know what was there. All right, now for some wood filler. There were a couple chips and gashes and, a couple areas that needed wood filler. So I'm just going to apply some with a popsicle stick because I cannot find for the life of me my putty knife. And I'll just do some color correction over the wood filler a little bit later on. And using wood filler is pretty straightforward. It's very easy to use. You just want to pack the area full of wood filler and make sure that you really get it in down in there so that the wood filler is completely adhered. And you're going to want to leave it a little bit proud so that when you come back later and sand, it'll be flush to the surface of the veneer. And I usually use a putty knife, or in this case a popsicle stick, to flatten out the wood filler. But sometimes just using your finger works out just as well. I let that wood filler dry for about 2 to 3 hours, and now I'm coming in with a 220 grit sandpaper, and I'm going to be doing my next but final sanding of 220 grit. Now, when I do my subsequent rounds of sanding, I like to use the pencil trick, which I mentioned before, and I just wanted to explain that really quickly. The pencil trick is basically just making light marks on the wood so that when you go over it with the sandpaper, you know where you haven't sanded, and it also prevents you from sanding too far down into the veneer. And you might be wondering, how does making light pencil marks on the wood prevent you from sanding through veneer? And it's actually pretty simple. Normally when you sand without the pencil trick, you tend to kind of go over the same spot too many times and slowly but surely work your way down through that veneer. With the pencil trick now, you know exactly where you've already sanded, so you don't keep going back over that spot. As soon as the pencil marks disappear, you move on, therefore preventing blowout. So it's just a really good way to keep track of where you have been and haven't been, and also gives you a very even sanding. Now, as I was sanding the sides, I noticed here that there was a little impression in the wood, a little dent. And to fix that, or to try to fix that at least, I'm going to try my next favorite trick, which is using a hot solder iron and a soaking wet shop towel. And it's very simple, actually. All you got to do is just wet the area that you want to fix, and then you just apply the wet paper towel and take the solder iron and just go over that spot for a couple of minutes, maybe 5-10 minutes. And what happens is the heat and the moisture actually raises and swells the wood fibers, fixing the dent. This dent that I was working on here was pretty significant, so I spent about 15 minutes or so steaming out that dent, and eventually it did raise to a certain extent, but it didn't raise all the way. But that's all right. I mean, it did raise a little bit, so it's definitely progress. And you can see in this shot right here, it definitely looks a lot better than it did before. So all I'm going to do now is just fill up the area that I couldn't raise with some wood filler, and I'll just color correct that a little bit later on. All right, so continuing sanding down this piece with 220 grit, and I'm just going to sand down these drawers. And as I was about to flip this piece back over, I noticed that there was one more little dent. So I'm going to see if I can use that trick again and just raise it up a little bit. And you may notice that there's some smoke that's coming off of the solder iron. And don't worry, this isn't the wood burning. It's just the steam coming off of the shop towel. This technique is totally safe for wood. I let that wood filler dry and came back in and sanded down the last two sides of the pieces. And I just had to mention here, the wood grain on this particular side is just breathtaking. Walnut has to be probably my favorite wood, I'd say. Just because of this reason, honestly. There's just so many different wild grain patterns and colors and figuring in this wood. I'm going to be using this dark walnut cement stain to stain the trim work. And I'm just using a brush to apply it. And this isn't going to be the final color. It's going to be a little bit slightly different. I'm going to be adding a toner on top of this. So it's going to be a much deeper kind of dark reddish brown color, which I'm hoping is going to contrast really nicely with the very kind of light reddish brown color of the walnut. Now, normally when you stain, it's usually a wipe on, wipe off kind of a product. But in this case, I'm basically going to be brushing on the stain, letting it dry, and maybe wiping up just a tiny bit of it. This is really going to help me get that opaque look without having to use a paint. And I know that there are some people who aren't fond of that look, and I totally get that. I actually do like this look a lot, but the reason why I'm doing it is because it was very close to the original. If you remember from the beginning of the video, the trim work was so dark, it almost looked like it was black. Now, the trim work that I'm doing here, it's going to have a little bit more color than the original. It's going to look a little bit tiny bit lighter, but it's still going to be extremely opaque and very dark. I let that stain dry for a couple of hours, and now I'm coming in with a tack cloth, and I'm just wiping up all the dust so that no dust ends up in my finish. And next, I'm going to be using some Easy Vinyl Sealer from Mohawk. And this is just going to seal the wood and act as a little bit of a primer for the lacquer that I'm going to be putting on next. I was thinking about maybe sealing the entire piece with Odie's oil, but I kind of wanted to have contrasting sheen levels in the trim work and the veneer, so I'm going with lacquer. And I did 2 coats of the Easy Vinyl Sealer, and I'm going to let that dry. And in the meantime, I'm going to work on staining the rim of the drawer faces. And I was thinking about going with maybe a lighter color to kind of more closely match the veneer, but I kind of like that little bit of contrast on the drawer faces. I think it's going to look really nice. So after my 2 coats of Easy Vinyl Sealer had completely dried, I came in with some toner, and this is a dark red walnut toner by Mohawk, and this is just going to deepen the color of the trim work and make it a lot more dark and colorful. And you can see in this shot right here, just the layer of color that it adds to the trim work and gives it that nice rich color. Now, normally with toner, you kind of want to be far away with it. You want to kind of mist it on or fog it on. You don't really want to be up close with it because then you get blotching. But since this is just the trim work that I'm doing and I want a nice, strong, solid color, I'm going in pretty close. Now, while that layer of toner is drying, I'm just going to begin putting a layer of Odie's Universal Oil on these drawers. And I'm not going to go into depth about what Odie's oil is because I pretty much talk about it in every single video. But basically, Odie's oil is just a tung oil-based hard wax oil finish. And it's one of my favorite finishes to use on beautiful wood like walnut or teak or mahogany. And you can really see why as I'm applying this here. It just brings out the beautiful depth and beauty of the wood and also gives a very natural looking finish as opposed to those very kind of plasticky looking finishes that other types of finishes give. And with this product, you really get a lot of bang for your buck. You really don't need a lot of product at all. It goes a very, very long way. And you can see I actually put a little bit too much of the oil on this one drawer, so I'm just going to take some of the leftover oil and just use it for the next drawer. So while the Odie's oil is doing its thing on the drawers, I'm just going to take some Mohawk pre-catalyzed clear lacquer in semi-gloss finish, and I'm just going to apply some to the night tables on the trim work. And I'm not going to show each coat that I do, but I did 4 coats in total, which I think is going to give a pretty decent amount of protection, and also a really nice shiny kind of finish, which I think is going to contrast really well with the nice satin finish that the Odie's oil gives. And you could see here, my can of lacquer was spitting on me a little bit. And when I say spitting, I just mean that it's spitting up little drops of lacquer instead of spraying it, which is what it's supposed to be doing. And you can see right here, especially as I'm doing this side, it really started to spit up a lot. And there's a easy way to kind of fix this. You can just take a little spray nozzle from one of the other cans that you have that was working and just replace it. That tends to work actually pretty well for me. So I'm finished spraying my lacquer, and now I'm just going to remove all the tape. And you could see that there was a little bit of lacquer that got on the top and the sides, just a little bit. So I'm just going to do a quick hand sanding of 220 and just remove that. And you can see after a light hand sanding, it comes right off. So I'm just going to wipe up all the sanding dust and get ready for my next step, which is applying the Odie's Universal Oil to the rest of the pieces. And I know I've been talking a lot in this video, so I'm just going to sit back, relax, and let you guys enjoy watching this Odie's oil transform this wood into the beauty that it is. I let the Odie's oil sit on there for about an hour and a half, and now I'm just going to buff it all off. Now, this is a really important step when using Odie's oil. If you don't buff the oil off, you're not really going to have a very nice finish. You only really get that really nice, beautiful finish when you buff all of the oil off. And I mean all of the oil. You have to get really every last little bit of oil off of the piece. And I like to usually come in with a cotton terry towel and get the bulk of the oil off. And then later I'll come in with some shop towels and just do the final buffing. Alright, just 2 more steps to go and we are done here. I let that Odie's oil cure for a couple of days, probably around 3 or 4 days. And now I'm just going to come in and fix that little blemish that was on the top of this piece over here on the side. And I'm just using some blend all sticks and I'm just rubbing it in just to blend it in as nicely as I can. And I'm just trying to get a better base color for this veneer to match it. And then I'm going to use a black blend all stick and just follow down the grain lines. Once I'm happy with the color correction, I'm just going to spray some clear lacquer and seal it in. I usually like to start with light colors and then I'll kind of build up on it and use darker colors to match the veneer. And then I'll come in with a black or very dark blend all stick or markers and just follow down the grain lines. Now, it's not going to be perfect, and I know that, but the whole point is just to camouflage the area as best as you can so it's not immediately noticeable. So after I did my color correction, now the next and last step is to use some Odie's wood butter, and I'm just going to apply some just to the tops. And this is going to add a little bit extra sheen and a little bit extra protection as well. And you can see just with that little bit that I have on my pad right here, that's going to be enough to do both of these tops. And this is the same jar, I think, that I've had since I started using Odie's products. So it really does go a very, very long way. I hear a lot of people saying that Odie's products are expensive, and while yes, they are expensive, they really do last a very long time if used properly. And you can see that just a little bit of difference that the Odie's wood butter adds to the top. It just gives it a really nice warm glow. All right, it's about that time where we go back and take a look at what this piece used to look like. Aside from being just kind of old and tired looking, these pieces had pretty significant finish damage, and the tops were in pretty rough shape. There was a bunch of paper, it seems like, that was stuck to it, and stains, and just a bunch of ugliness. There was some hardware that was missing on one of the drawers, as well as the finish pretty much chipping off on the trim work. So I hope you guys like what I did with these pieces. I hope I did it justice. If you're new here, consider subscribing. I try to put out a video every 2 weeks, or hopefully even more often now, since I have some more time on my hands. Comment, like, and share. I always love hearing from you guys. Alright, so without any further ado, enjoy the reveal. I will see you next time.